Desolation. Ruin. Corpses littered the earth. This year, I turned 34, and sometimes I wonder. A man lay amidst the carnage, muttering to himself. His face was etched with exhaustion, his long hair framing a gaze turned towards the sky, a sky that resembled nothing so much as hell. The bright moonlight above starkly contrasted with the tragic scene below. The man looked at the moon and sighed. How had things come to this? The sword in his hand felt like a shackle, binding him. If only I had learned swordsmanship sooner. Then, perhaps, I could have prevented my sister from being sent to the Empire. He sat alone atop the mound of bodies, his lament echoing in the stillness. If that had happened, would this monstrous version of me even exist? The pointless question drew another sigh from his lips. The ethereal image of a woman flickered in his mind. If that had truly happened, would I have even met Master? He thought of his master, gratitude welling within him. Master, you transformed me from a useless wretch into someone who has learned so much. The memory of his master's steady, strong, and caring gaze warmed him. The moments I spent with Master were the best of my life. Master, you were my savior, and even more than that. The man closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. If I had known I would regret it like this, I should have treated Master better. He plunged his sword into the ground, taking a deep breath. Surrounded by corpses, the bright moonlight began to shift, turning a bloody red, mirroring the tragedy of his life. From behind him, a pair of thin legs approached, a long sword gripped tightly in hand, advancing towards him. Sensing the killing intent, he spun around, to see a young man, sword in hand, his face a mixture of hesitation and resolve, walking towards him. Behind the young man, a group of soldiers began to gather. The young man's sword trembled in his grip. Seeing this, the man couldn't help but scoff inwardly. Pathetic. Can he even hold a sword while shaking like that? But I don't want to fight a child. And is this how you repay me? The young man pointed his sword at the man, his voice trembling. You killed my father. The man looked up, taking in the young man's face. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. He honestly couldn't remember who the boy's father was. Did I? Oh, my deepest regrets. The young man recoiled at his casual response. Monster. You're a monster. Looking at the young man, a strange feeling welled up inside him. He hadn't known what the boy would call him, but monster wasn't unexpected. He'd heard it countless times before, so it no longer held any sting. He clenched his blood-soaked hand into a fist, a tingling sensation spreading through his body. The pain was intensifying. He could almost feel the agony of those he had slain. I can feel their pain, deep in my gut. My head is burning, constantly sending me signals to stop, to end it all. The young man stood before me, his green eyes burning with a strange resolve, as if pleading with himself to hold on just a little longer. His voice dropped low as he asked, Monster, why? He didn't even bother refuting the familiar epithet. Looking at the young man gripping his sword, he replied, I am the monster who single-handedly slaughtered the finest masters, shattered the great nation of the Tulkun Empire, and extinguished the royal bloodline entirely. He told the young man, Do you even know how many bastards I've killed with my own hands? The young man dripped with sweat, and the man speaking grew more animated, power surging through his veins. I've killed tens of thousands. You call me a monster. Come on, kid. Isn't it obvious? Looking at the young man's pale, bloodless face, he couldn't help but laugh. The young man's hesitant movements reminded him of his own past helplessness. Look at him, trembling while holding such an expensive-looking sword. He reminds me of that little monster. He tilted his head. Kid, what's your name? The young man stammered, Jack. Hearing the name, he looked at the young man in surprise and let out a bitter laugh. Fate is a cruel mistress, isn't she? My name is Jack, too. The wry smile on his face seemed strangely out of place. Did I kill your father? His next words hit the young man like a thunderclap. I've killed so many. I don't even remember anyone named Stuart. The young man's eyes widened, his pupils contracting in horror. Then, tears welled up in Jack's eyes and streamed down his dust-streaked cheeks. Even if he wasn't a good father, he was still the father I needed. He seemed to snap out of it, starting to speak, then stopping. Needed a father, huh? How enviable. He waved a dismissive hand, his tone dark, and said to the young man, I won't apologize for killing your father. Instead, I'll give you an opportunity. The young man stared at him in bewilderment. At that, his empty eyes stared straight at the young man. An opportunity that will chill you to the bone. Stab me with the sword you're holding. A cold sweat broke out on the young man at this request, the perspiration growing more profuse. But finally, he seemed to muster his courage, looking at him with a determined gaze. Seeing Jack hesitate, he continued, "Isn't this a wonderful opportunity?" His wounds continued to bleed, and he was growing tired, so he sat down. He looked at the young man with a sly glint in his eyes. The chance to avenge your father, and be hailed as a hero for slaying a monster. Watching the young man cautiously approach, he thought to himself, truth be told, if I focus, I could probably survive this. A broken leg. It'll heal. Internal organs ruptured. I just need to restore them. But I don't want to. You could say I've completely given up now. I don't cling to any power, nor do I cling to life, and even less to the future. You've been chasing after Jack for so long, and time is running out. Isn't this your chance to become a hero? Jack stepped in front of me, raising his sword, intending to end my life. I closed my eyes, accepting my fate, waiting for release at the hands of my enemy. But no blade fell. Jack's hand trembled, frozen in midair, the sword pointing ly towards the ground. Jack's knees buckled, and he knelt before me. A shattering sensation spread through Jack's body. Jack's tears flowed freely. His actions surprised me, yet they were also somewhat expected. The outcome was simple. The boy couldn't kill me. Even though he missed his chance, still. Well done. I smiled and reached out, stroking Jack's head, offering comfort. Honestly, do you think you could live peacefully after killing me? Once you become a hero, your days will be filled with endless weariness. So many titles will be thrust upon you. I smiled, offering Jack advice. Don't live with regrets like me. You're not like me. Aren't you still young? A flicker of hope ignited in Jack's eyes, and the tears he'd held back for so long finally flowed freely at my sincere words. Seeing Jack's tears, I began to waver. My resolve was crumbling. Then I instructed him. Go and tell everyone that the demon is dead, that the war is over. Jack sobbed. With power like this, why did you live like that? My hand, gripping the sword, suddenly stilled. I released the weapon, calmly replying to Jack. Why did I live like that? I closed my eyes, my hand slowly loosening its grip on the blood-soaked sword, my body slumping to the ground. This was the end. I could feel it. The sensation in my fingertips was fading, like air leaking from a balloon. My vision blurred. Though I resisted, my eyes slowly closed. Jack sat beside my lifeless body. Those around us drew closer. I forgot how to breathe. All sound faded away. Jack's tears fell onto my face. In that final moment, a thought flickered through my mind. That if everything could begin again, could I change this tragic ending? That's what I used to think. Thorns pierced the fragments of my memories, and I sank into a sea of recollection, as if in a dream. An image of myself as a child surfaced. Bright, innocent eyes. It was hard to believe this would be the monster of the future. My aloof, towering father appeared as well, questioning whether I was truly his son. And my mother, whom I'd only seen in pictures, dead since the moment of my birth. His beautiful older sister, the one who loved him most, whose beauty was renowned across the continent. Even his second older brother, who always bullied him. He remembered everything. A man stood on a battlefield, choked with smoke and the stench of blood, the chilling breath of death palpable in the air. After abandoning the name Jack Valentier, he had become a swordsman, wandering the continent. The events that had transpired flashed through his mind. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, bathing the room in a warm glow. He couldn't tell if it was real or a dream. Small feet in leather shoes stood before a mirror. Am I dead? He wondered. Am I truly dead? Perhaps this is the final flicker of life. Youthful, pale skin stared back from the mirror, startling him. Haze. I must be going mad. Outside the manor, sunlight pierced the clear blue sky, illuminating vibrant green trees, a stark contrast to the desolate ruins etched in his memory. The Second Continental War, the one he had ignited, the war that had exploded. His sword perpetually stained with blood. He had triumphed, a tyrannical ruler, a monster among monsters. The solitary image of himself seated upon a mountain of corpses surfaced in his mind, perhaps the one memory he clung to. He saw himself consumed by a furious vengeance, destroying the entire Tulkun Empire, the empire that had invaded the western continent, slaughtering everyone who bore the name of Tulkun. That bloodthirsty, empty gaze, it was truly chilling. He had declared his victory, a victory he clutched tightly. He had rejoiced in the fulfillment of his desires. Then, he had collapsed, the bloodlust in his eyes replaced by a profound sorrow. His eyes slowly closed. He had lived as a monster, and he would die as one, so he embraced the approaching death. He was surrounded by debris, by white bones, remnants of battles past. Because he had no reason left to live, and in that moment, his heart ceased to beat. He thought it was over, but it wasn't. Under the gentle sunlight, his eyes opened once more. But what devilish situation was this? He stood before the mirror, repeatedly pinching his cheeks, trying to confirm reality. Whether by dark magic or some witch's curse, had he truly returned to the past? He pinched until his face flushed crimson, his bright, clear eyes reflecting in the mirror. How could this be? The sunlight outside the manor remained brilliant, a stark contrast to the turmoil within him. He began to recall the Valantier Marquiate, a prosperous family in the kingdom of Teslien, a lineage of loyal retainers who served the king. He was the third son of this family, the youngest. His status was indeed noble, the youngest son of a Marquiate in the kingdom. Holding such a title came with heavy responsibilities. Had he not succumbed to the greed for inheritance, with the position he held, he could have lived a life of comfort and ease. That was the usual path. However, within his family, this notion didn't apply. The Marquiate Valantier was an exception. Jack lowered his gaze to the rose garden below, his small hand stroking a blood-red bloom. Amidst the verdant expanse, he stepped into this place, both familiar and foreign. The rose garden could be considered an annex tucked away in a corner of the manor, surrounded by a vigilant guard of soldiers. Beautiful from the outside, it was merely an illusion. This place was known as a gilded cage. He stood beneath the eaves, his gaze sweeping across the vast, azure sky. Its sole purpose was to isolate him, the youngest son, from the outside world. He sat down, basking in the warmth of the sun, a sensation he hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. No vassals or any assistants allowed. This was his prison, the rose garden. A voice suddenly called out from behind, startling him. "Young master, I've prepared your drink." He turned to face the speaker, his eyes landing on the long-haired man in a meticulously tailored suit. Black gloves encased his hands, which held a glass of vibrant red juice. Most striking was the look of genuine affection in his eyes. The only person who cared for him was the steward, who also served as his valet. The man approaching was John. He turned back, offering a smile that felt strangely out of place, given the lack of guile he knew resided in John. Accepting the glass of juice, he asked, "You didn't poison this, did you?" John's hands flew up in a flustered denial, a comical expression spreading across his face. "No, of course not." Seeing this, Jack took a sip, a smile gracing his lips. "I'm just joking," he said to John. "I'm always grateful for you." "For what?" John chuckled, a touch embarrassed. Jack didn't answer, simply watching John's retreating figure, lost in thought as he savored the drink in his hand. There were 11 people in the rose garden, including himself. One of them was John, the man who had just brought him the tomato juice. He surveyed the rose garden again. The other 10 were guards, their eyes constantly on him. He pondered. Aside from John, he needn't concern himself with the others. But what to do now? He murmured, a wave of despondency washing over him. He leaned back, gazing up at the vast expanse of blue. His fingers toyed with the glass of crimson tomato juice. Truthfully, when he thought he had died, he had completely given up. He hadn't expected to return to the past, and he still hadn't adjusted. He was relieved to know this wasn't a dream, but he hadn't realized he'd returned until an hour ago. A bird sang merrily on a branch overhead. He stared at his palms. He had no plan, not yet. He pressed his lips together, a pang of bitterness rising in his chest. He was 14 years old, but looking at his hands, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pity for himself. They were smooth, unblemished by calluses, devoid of any trace of magic or anything of the sort. He looked at his hands, a wry smile twisting his lips. Compared to other noble-born children, he truly fell short. Footsteps echoed from behind. The shadowy figure lurking there seemed poised to strike, but Jack remained lost in thought. Of course, the root of his inadequacy was his current lack of magical ability. A sharp blow landed on his head, leaving him dazed and his face draining of color. He stared, bewildered, struggling to comprehend what had just happened. The shadowy figure showed no sign of relenting. Jack rubbed his head, berating himself for his carelessness. The pain throbbed. It had been a long time since he'd been struck like that. The glass of tomato juice shattered, the sound mingling with the figure's voice. They say even a dog won't bother you when you're eating, right? The familiar, hateful voice jolted Jack. Hatred flared in his eyes as the man with the detestable face stood before him, bellowing, clumsy oaf. You witless imbecile. Your elder brother is standing right here, and you don't even offer a greeting. Jack glared back, the other man's repugnant features radiating a palpable aura of malevolence that sickened him. Valentier Perron, his brother, 3 years his senior, the second son of the Valentier family. Jack's teeth ground together, his body trembling with rage. The reason he couldn't cultivate magic. No, the reason he hadn't been able to cultivate magic. A furious heat bloomed within him. Without a word, he slowly rose to his feet. It was all because of this wretch, his constant threats and abuse. Jack straightened, his gaze fixed on Valentier Perron, who stood before him, smug and arrogant. Perron's brow furrowed, his own anger igniting. His eyes burned with a hatred as if looking upon his sworn enemy. That loathsome face. Even after centuries, the memory sent ripples of revulsion through Jack's mind. Perron's contemptuous voice echoed in his memory, pathetic worm. He'd poured a cup of scalding tea over him, hissing, if I wanted to, I could kill you at any moment. Those threats, that disdain, they had relentlessly assaulted Jack's heart. You're nothing like your sister. You're utterly useless. Don't bother learning anything, be it swordsmanship or magic. Don't learn a single thing. He had constantly threatened Jack, terrified that one day, he might become strong enough to overthrow him. If you learn them, I'll consider it an act of betrayal, and I'll kill you. That contemptuous gaze was seared into Jack's mind, both in this life and the last. As long as you possess the blood of the Marquise, or at least remain within these walls, you will only eat and wear what I provide. Jack's pathetic, trembling form evoked a pang of pity, even now. Live like the dead rat you are. Perron had sneered, taking pleasure in Jack's misery. And who knows, he'd said, taking a smug sip of his tea. I, your future Marquis, might even acknowledge you as my little brother someday. The memories flooded back, bringing with them the raw emotions of that time. As a child, Jack had been terrified, the whispers of the servants echoing in his ears. Because of this timidity, he was called the disgrace of the family, a laughingstock for everyone, even the servants. Of course, this only spread within the manor. If it had spread outside, he would have been even more pathetic. His thin frame, his young shoulders burdened by mental and physical blows, had hardened Jack. A sad fate for the third son of a Marquise, mocked even by the servants in his own home. When they gathered, he became their source of amusement. A gentle breeze rustled through the rose garden, stirring the leaves. There, on the roof within the rose garden, Jack once again faced the person who had caused him so much misery in his past life. The reason he had been treated so poorly was all because of this bastard, the second son of the family, Valentier Perron. Thinking of the past, Jack looked at Perron and couldn't help but sigh. That's how it was. But to see him acting so ridiculously, just because the firstborn of the family wasn't a son. The graceful image of his older sister appeared, her long black hair flowing, the only person Jack trusted, the only one who cared for him. Her face was beautiful and rosy. Her eyes sparkled like a starry sky. She was a year older than Perron. She couldn't inherit the family, simply because she was a woman. Her elegant, yet lonely figure evoked pity. The eldest daughter, possessing the radiant beauty of the Marquise, yet unable to inherit. The red jewels she wore became the shackles binding her fate. She would be forced to marry into a family of his father's choosing, living a confined life, tricked into a small manor, continuing the family line. Thinking of this, Jack's face darkened further. That was her current predicament. Looking at the mastermind behind it all, Jack wanted to tear him apart and feed him to the dogs. And the one standing before him now was the one who wanted to exploit her the most. Jack clenched his fists, restraining himself from losing his last shred of reason. This bastard always avoided him and his sister whenever members of the royal family were present, the useless wretch. Jack's gaze grew more ferocious. This man deserved to be finished off right here. Perron maintained his contemptuous demeanor, arrogantly saying, "Look at your eyes." He lunged, fist clenched, wanting to teach his younger brother a lesson. "How dare you glare at me with those eyes?" However, he was fundamentally no match for a monster like Jack. Jack swiftly extended his hand, lightly gripping Perron's wrist, preventing him from struggling. Perron paled, looking at his captured wrist, unable to pull free. The surrounding soldiers were also startled by this scene. Perron looked into Jack's unwavering eyes, gritting out, "You." The mixture of panic, anger, and fear on his face was truly satisfying. Perron sputtered, "You dare hold my hand. You're nothing but a lowlife, less than an insect." But unfortunately for Perron, Jack was no longer the Jack in his memory. Jack now was a monster who had killed countless people. Jack seized Perron by the shoulders and hurled him into the air. Perron flipped through the air before crashing to the ground, the sickening crunch of bone accompanying his agonized scream. Perron's face, pale with shock and pain, turned upwards to Jack. What do you think you're doing?" A chillingly cheerful, almost perverse, smile stretched across Jack's face. "Oh dear," he drawled, "should I offer you a hand up?" Perron, seething, began to channel his magic, his fists clenching. He drew the sword at his hip, a stream of curses spilling from his lips. "You lowborn, ungrateful wretch." He glared at Jack, his focus now palpable. The guards outside, initially poised to intervene, seemed to reconsider. "What's going on?" One muttered. "Just leave them be. Don't get involved. You don't want the second young master to notice you." Jack had anticipated their inaction. "Just as I thought," he mused. "They won't even lift a finger." How predictable. The sight of his elder brother, magic swirling around him, coupled with the guard's apathy, drew a bitter laugh from Jack. Laughable. At that moment, John stepped between them, a desperate plea on his lips. "Young masters, please, calm yourselves. Please, don't resort to magic in this situation." Perron, enraged by the interruption, lashed out. His fist connected with John's face, sending the steward sprawling backwards. John's heavy fall sent a strange pang through Jack. He questioned himself. Was that concern? No, he wasn't concerned. He repeated the thought, a mantra against the unsettling feeling. After all, John had his secrets. Perron pointed a finger at Jack, his voice dripping with venom. "You arrogant bastard. I'll kill you, and that pompous servant of yours, right here, right now." His words, however, buzzed around Jack like insignificant flies. Jack, casually digging in his ear, strolled forward, a mocking glint in his eyes. "Is that all you've got? Hot air?" Perron trembled with fury, his sword now fully drawn. "What did you say?" Jack finally took a good look at the blade. He'd initially dismissed it as ornamental, but he'd been wrong. The memories of his past life, a life steeped in violence, surged through him. His legs twitched involuntarily. Despite his lack of training, his lack of magic, he didn't flinch as Perron lunged, meeting the gleaming blade with his bare fist. Yet, beneath the bravado, a chilling certainty settled in his gut. The outcome of this fight seemed predetermined. He was going to lose. Perron swung his sword with savage force. Jack knew his brother's weaknesses intimately. His strength peaked at the third magic circle. That was the extent of his abilities. Even with magic and that expensive sword, he was still just a spoiled brat. Jack effortlessly dodged Perron's clumsy attack. "Who are you trying to hit with that pathetic swordsmanship?" He glanced at John, his voice dropping to a low murmur. "What a joke." Jack stepped closer to Perron, a flicker of fear finally registering in his brother's eyes. "Should I just throw him out?" He wondered aloud. "You need a lesson in manners," Jack sneered, his contempt palpable. He seized Perron's wrist with a swift, brutal motion, locking his brother's arm in place. Perron, still oblivious to the shift in power, spat, "You filthy bastard." Jack ignored the insult, as meaningless as the buzzing of a fly. Perron was in the third stage of magical development. a stage where the mage's body would flood with magical energy when casting a spell. Observing his master's unusual strength and unsettling demeanor, John watched in stunned silence. It must be concentrated in his head, too, he thought. A cruel smile twisted Jack's lips. He reached out and grasped Perron's head. Let's see, then. Perron's face and hands were now completely restrained by Jack, leaving him utterly helpless. Terror must have been dawning on him. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound escaped. A savage glint entered Jack's eyes. He lunged forward, unable to contain a surge of exhilaration. 1% of the humiliation returned. Seems fair, he muttered. Perron couldn't evade the blow. The punch landed squarely on his head, sending him reeling. He crumpled to the ground, a string of curses dying on his lips as he lost consciousness. Jack shoved his hands in his pockets and nudged Perron with his foot, checking his condition. He's not dead, is he? He sighed, exasperated. He glanced over his shoulder. John sat frozen on the ground, his hand arrested mid-wipe of a bloodstain. The surrounding soldiers shifted nervously, their apprehension thick in the air. One of the soldiers reached for his sword, intending to defend Perron. Jack raised a hand, stopping him. His eyes radiated a chilling menace. Unless you want to end up like him, he warned, his voice low and dangerous, stay still. The soldiers lowered their weapons. Beyond the lethal aura emanating from Jack, they knew instinctively not to provoke him. Dismissing the guards with a glance, Jack turned back to his beloved brother. Very well, he said. He bent down and grabbed Perron by the hair, dragging him across the wooden floor. Hauling the well-fed Perron was no easy task for Jack's lean frame. Lose some weight, he grunted. You're heavy. Perron groaned faintly, the movement tugging at his hair. He was still unconscious. Pathetic and infuriating. Jack dragged him to the fountain. Time to wash your face, he murmured. Such a filthy face deserves some gentle care. Hot day, isn't it? He continued. Shouldn't a good little brother cool his elder brother's head? Perron, unable to protest, was at Jack's mercy. Jack took his silence as agreement and shoved Perron's head into the fountain. Water erupted in a spray. Perron sputtered awake, gasping for air. He thrashed wildly, struggling to breathe. Jack didn't release his grip. Surprised, aren't you? He taunted. And I haven't even used that magic you're so proud of. Perron clawed at Jack's arms, desperate to break free. The memory of everything this son of a bitch had put him through flooded back, each incident a fresh wound. Not long after his elder sister was married off to the Empire, his cold-hearted father died at his desk. The man he loved, the one who assassinated their father, the Marquis, with poison. Afterward, he became the Marquis and committed countless atrocities. Just like that, under the Empire's protection, the Marquisate, ruled by a venomous snake, met its inevitable end. The outcome was clear. The Volunteer Marquisate, failing in every endeavor, vanished without a trace. Jack recalled these events, not with any particular concern, but with a flicker of regret. He felt no obligation to avenge his father or his family. What truly fueled his resentment? He gritted his teeth, was the regret and rage that once again intertwined within him. He had squandered the opportunity his sister had sacrificed herself to create. Idiots. No, idiots, he muttered under his breath. The image of his beloved sister surfaced in his mind. A woman of sharp intellect, a figure he held in the highest regard. She possessed such exquisite grace, her radiant smile a fleeting warmth against the icy heart of this bloodthirsty monster. He wondered what she had felt when she journeyed to the Empire. He couldn't fathom it. A fairy tale wedding, awash in vibrant blooms. For the glory of their family, she had gone to the Empire. The nobles below, offering smiles and blessings, surely understood the reality of her situation. As the man led her away, she wore a breathtaking wedding gown, its pristine white a stark contrast to her raven hair. The man, her husband, spoke. Well, Elizabeth. His voice was cold, not a question but a sneer. Are you afraid? The man's reputation preceded him throughout the Empire. Long ago, rumors had begun to swirl about him. The fourth prince, a man said to have committed every imaginable atrocity. A cruel smile twisted his lips. No one will come to see you, not even a proper wife. At his words, Elizabeth seemed to freeze, the horror in her eyes fading into a vacant emptiness. She silently lowered her head, nodding repeatedly, a forced smile on her face. The wedding, a descent into hell, a masquerade of happiness, had begun. Out of love for her family, Elizabeth resigned herself to her fate, bowing her head to the fourth prince's commands. Yes, I understand. She endured every abuse. If that bastard and his father were to discover the truth, what would become of her? He took a deep breath, trying to dispel the thoughts. Forget it, he thought. Dwelling on it will only drive me mad. Suddenly, Perron's weak voice broke the silence, a stammering plea. Forgive. Tears and snot streamed down Perron's face, a pathetic sight. He turned, pleading, please, have mercy. But his expression held no sway over Jack, who had witnessed far more horrifying scenes, grown far too familiar with this particular mask of despair. Perron's incessant begging reminded him of the battlefield, where he'd seen countless faces contorted in similar pleas. They all shared a single, desperate purpose: to manipulate with the visages of those consumed by the fear of death. Jack abruptly yanked Perron's hair back, sitting down beside him, his voice a low, menacing growl that made Perron tremble. Think carefully about everything you've done from this point forward. Then, leaning in close, he whispered something that drained the color from Perron's face and sent a chill down his spine. Oh, I'm sorry. You probably don't remember, do you? What should I do to jog your memory? Terror welled in Perron's eyes, threatening to spill over, but his voice seemed trapped in his throat. It seems you need to experience it firsthand to understand the value of family, doesn't it? He raised his hand, preparing to strike Perron again. Doesn't it? Perron, consumed by terror, squeezed his eyes shut and screamed, I'm wrong. Please, I'm wrong. I beg you stop. But a shout cut through Jack's rage, pulling him back from the brink. He stopped, turning to look at John. Stop it. John, frantic with worry for Jack, rushed forward to intervene. Young master, you can't. Please, stop. Jack looked up at John impatiently, his grip on Perron's hair still unyielding. He slammed Perron's head against the fountain, then released him with cold indifference, letting Perron crumple to the ground. He turned, his gaze falling on a nearby guard. You, he commanded. The guard, trembling, stammered. Why yes, young master. Jack stepped on Perron's body, as if he were crushing a repulsive insect. His voice was glacial. Get rid of this. He showed no concern for Perron's limp form. Perhaps he simply didn't want to pollute the grounds. He's not dead yet. Take him away, and get out. With that, he turned and walked away. The guard scrambled forward, anxiously checking on Perron. Second young master, are you all right? Jack passed John, clapping him lightly on the shoulder before heading inside. John looked from his young master to Perron, his face etched with worry. The guard hoisted Perron onto his shoulder and carried him towards the main house. Jack, indifferent, continued inside. Just as he'd anticipated, whispers about him began to spread. Word of his actions rippled through the family, leaving chaos in its wake. When Perron returned, half dead, everyone was stunned. They rushed to attend to him. Perron's mother, seeing her son in such a state, panicked. Her face darkened with a mixture of fear for her son and incandescent rage. Jack Valentier's half-brother, the future heir to the Marquette Mantis and beneficiary of their mother's considerable wealth. Perron's mother fainted from the sheer shock and fury of it all. The housekeeper and the other servants rushed about frantically, tending to Perron. They watched as Perron, the one who was supposed to inherit the Marquette, discarded blood-soaked handkerchiefs one after another. Bottles of medicine dwindled rapidly, used in a desperate attempt to keep him alive. He lay in his sickbed, head matted with blood, a growing terror of water taking root in his mind. Naturally, the entire Marquette was in an uproar. Jack, listening to John's report, showed no sign of concern. Everything was proceeding according to his plan. He propped his feet up on the table, leisurely sipping his tea. He picked up a slice of strawberry cake from the table, savoring its delicate sweetness. With an air of utter calm, he speared a plump strawberry with a toothpick and popped it into his mouth. John, however, couldn't help but worry for his master. The recent events had robbed him of sleep and filled him with a gnawing anxiety. Whispers began to circulate, rumors spreading among the manor's staff. Perron had been a prodigy, expected to shoulder the responsibilities of the Marquis. He had reached the third circle of magic at the young age of 17. How could the youngest brother have possibly defeated him? The rumors multiplied, seeping into every corner of the estate. The youngest hadn't even studied magic or any form of combat. Was there a hidden secret behind his sudden strength? And if so, why? Why choose this moment to reveal it? The sight of Part1 clinging to life, haunted by nightmares, was deeply unsettling. Part1 was to turn 18 next year. He had already begun planning his own investiture ceremony after his coming-of-age celebration. The servants' gossip grew louder, and some wondered if the youngest son was aiming for that position himself. A slender figure emerged from behind the chattering servants, stepping forward with a quiet grace. It was Elizabeth, Jack's elder sister, her face etched with worry. She addressed the servants. "Tell me, what are you all talking about?" From that point on, the rumors only intensified, spreading further and sowing unease among those living within the Marquis. A man in a crimson robe stood in a study overflowing with books, two subordinates respectfully reporting to him. This was the current head of the family, Marquis Valentier. He turned and addressed his subordinates. "Summon my third son." How would the Marquis handle this situation? Sunlight streamed through the familiar stained glass window, illuminating Jack's room. He continued to enjoy the meal John had prepared. "Delicious, as always," he commented. John bowed his head, eyes closed, accepting the compliment. "Thank you, young master." From outside, a maid appeared at the door to John's quarters. John approached her, and she leaned in, whispering, "It seems something serious has happened." John, upon hearing this, couldn't help but be startled. "What?" he exclaimed. After the maid left, John turned and reported to Jack. "Young master, the Marquis has summoned you to the main house." Jack didn't show any worry, simply asking, "Right now?" Receiving John's confirmation, he pushed himself up from the table, quickly donned his cloak, and headed for the door. John hurried after him, calling out, "Please wait a moment, young master. I'll accompany you." A flicker of annoyance crossed Jack's face. "It's all right," he dismissed John's offer. "I'm not a child." The words hung in the air, leaving John momentarily speechless. He didn't dare disobey, however, and simply stood at the door as Jack departed. "I understand. Please be careful, young master." Within the main house of the estate, maids bustled about their duties. Jack weaved through the throng, making his way towards his esteemed father. His presence was unusual, especially after recent events, and curious glances followed him like shadows. Noticing the scrutiny, he sighed inwardly. It's been a while, he thought. He quickened his pace, observing that these clearly lower-ranking servants showed him no deference, not even a perfunctory greeting. Disregarded, he mused. How tiresome. He reached the door to his father's study. Indifferent to their stares, he extended his hand, preparing to open the door and enter, hoping for a swift conclusion to this summons. His action was abruptly halted, however, as two guards barred his way with their weapons. Jack stared at the impassive guards. "They're treating me like I'm invisible," he noted with a hint of amusement. "Knights, are they?" he wondered, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. He stood there for a moment, contemplating his next move. Then, without warning, Jack strolled up to one of the guards and gave him a light kick. "Can't you see me?" he taunted, his voice laced with mockery. "Keck out your tongue." The surrounding servants watched the scene unfold, some stifling laughter. Jack, meeting the guard's cold, threatening stare, couldn't help but grin. The Jack of his past life would have recoiled from such a look, turning tail and fleeing. But this Jack was different. His smile remained, but it was a chilling smile, devoid of warmth. "Lose the look," he warned, his voice low and menacing, "or I'll tear you in two." The guard's blood ran cold. "What?" he stammered, disbelief etched on his face. Jack kicked him hard in the leg, sending the knight sprawling to the ground, clutching his leg in pain. "I won't say it again. The Marquis summoned me. Why am I not allowed inside?" he demanded of the foolish knight. The knight scrambled to his feet, stammering, I cannot say, young master." A flicker of anger flashed in Jack's eyes, though his voice remained calm. "So, I'm to stand here and wait," he thought with weary disdain. "These tedious theatrics. You're not worthy to be here. Repent until I allow you in. This kind of thing. These people never change." Without another thought, Jack turned to leave. Seeing this, the knight quickly asked, "Young master, where are you going?" Jack replied without hesitation, "Where else would I go?" The knight, momentarily stunned, asked what. Jack stated bluntly, "Tell the Marquis to come find me if he has something to say. Why summon me for this idiotic nonsense?" The two knights gaped at him, one murmuring in disbelief, "Has he truly lost his mind?" A servant of the Marquis entered, reporting, "The young master has left." The handwriting at the desk didn't pause, merely asking, "Left?" The servant, his voice laced with apology, replied, "Yes, Marquis Valantier. I sincerely apologize, but it is the truth." Upon hearing the report, the Marquis showed no anger, simply stating, "I understand." He set down his pen, rose, and leaning on his cane, remarked to the servant, "My youngest son has changed quite a bit." The sky bled into a mournful shade of crimson as dusk settled. Jack, having returned from the main house, he made no other move but to elegantly settle into a chair, sipping water and taking in the view. He had already anticipated the esteemed old man's next move. He would come to him soon enough. He abruptly stopped drinking. It seemed his calculations were correct. A strong evening breeze swept through, scattering the fading rose petals. Outside, the sound of approaching footsteps grew more insistent. It seemed he hadn't come alone. Jack bit his lip, suppressing the disgust rising within him. Speak of the devil. The Marquis entered, trailed by a retinue of servants and attendants, including Perron's useless mother. The Marquis's deeply lined face made Jack sigh inwardly. That face still reeked of stubbornness. A sardonic smile played on Jack's lips as he began to assess the man. He couldn't help but be amused. He hadn't changed a bit. The Marquis stopped before Jack, his face still etched with those irritating lines. Jack didn't bother to rise or offer any formal greeting. He simply continued to swirl the water in his glass, lounging in his chair. Unpleasant memories flickered through his mind. He had always treated the Marquis as a non-entity. Before he had left home in his past life, the Marquis had even tried to have him killed. A son who held his own father in utter contempt. That was the Marquis, the kind of man who would sell his own children for power. Jack held no fondness for this man, whose avarice for power far exceeded his grasp, and whose blindness to his own ambition was astounding. This so-called esteemed father, standing before him now, was none other than Marquis Valantier. He couldn't bring himself to call such a man father. With an air of nonchalance, Jack sat back in his chair, offering a perfunctory greeting. The Marquis, displaying no warmth in return, simply demanded, "Why did you do it?" Jack, equally blunt, retorted, "Why?" Perron's foolish mother, overhearing the exchange, erupted into a shriek. "How dare you speak to him that way?" The scene descended into chaos, devoid of any aristocratic decorum. Amidst the pandemonium, another dog barked its disapproval. Jack, however, remained unfazed, casually rocking back and forth in his chair as he spoke. "You've come all this way. Why don't we go inside?" He tossed a plate aside with a flick of his wrist. "Or do you intend to stand here and talk?" His actions and words infuriated Perron's mother, while the attending servants paled with fear. The plate landed with a delicate clatter, the crisp sound of shattering porcelain echoing through the room, a stark reminder to all present. It was also the opening shot in the battle between him and his father. Marquis Valantier began to emanate magical energy, his gaze fixed on Jack with a predatory intensity. He raised a hand, directing the magical energy towards Jack, enveloping him in its power. Jack didn't react, fully aware of his father's motive. He was testing to see if Jack possessed a magic heart. Not yet, Jack thought with a sardonic inward smile. "I don't have a magic heart yet." The Marquis raised an eyebrow. "You don't?" He scrutinized Jack once more. "It seems you have a talent for martial arts." Jack maintained his composure, taking a sip of refreshing fruit juice. "He won't believe I've regressed," he replied casually, "only because." Before he could finish his sentence, Perron's mother erupted again, her voice a rabid snarl. "You insolent bastard, you commoner's child, you insignificant." Before Jack could react, his esteemed father silenced the rabid dog. He observed Jack and said, "I thought you were useless, but it seems you do have some use after all." Hearing those words from his father's lips, Jack couldn't help but find it amusing. He set down his glass of juice and slowly rose to his feet. I'm not your son. When was I ever useless? The Marquis, hearing this, seemed momentarily struck by a strange delusion. Do you desire my acknowledgement as my son? Jack, without hesitation, shattered the illusion with a blunt retort. After all this time, your acknowledgement doesn't interest me in the slightest. The attending servants, overhearing this exchange, were stunned into awed silence, murmuring amongst themselves. The Marquis remained silent, his gaze fixed on Jack. After a moment, he turned and left, his thoughts inscrutable. I've heard what you have to say, Jack said, a hint of disappointment in his voice. Perhaps he had expected the Marquis to react like the rabid dog, leaping up in a furious roar. He just calmly left like that. What was the point of him even coming here? But in the end, Jack still wanted to poke the rabid dog a bit more, just to hear it bark. Turning towards Perron's mother, he said, "Oh, right, second mother." She turned, a venomous smile twisting her lips as she faced Jack. He smiled. I wonder, is it because your second son turned out the way he did that the wrinkles on your face have deepened tenfold? You should really pay more attention to your appearance. If he was going to speak, he might as well make every word a lethal blow. She was practically fuming, but powerless to do anything. She could only clench her fan tighter, gritting her teeth as she spat out the age-old retort, "You insolent brat." Seeing her like this, a delighted grin spread across Jack's face. It was genuinely amusing to see her so riled up. What a madwoman. He paid her outburst no mind. I have things to attend to. If you'll excuse me. He bowed to her, a deep, formal bow that, in this context, felt more like an insult than a courtesy. Have a pleasant evening. Give my regards to your second son. Inwardly, Jack mused, such a harmonious family. Night fell. In the rose garden, John was reading a letter he had just received. To Jack Valantier, third young master, you have caused a disturbance. You are sentenced to 20 days of solitary confinement. John, a mixture of frustration and bewilderment in his voice, asked Jack, that's what the letter says. What in the world happened while I was at the main house? Under John's barrage of questions, Jack snapped back, irritated, just the usual. You're making a big deal out of nothing. And you're loud. Be quiet. Jack frowned, his concentration fixed on the canvas before him as he sat sketching. They always ignore it when that second son beats me, but I get solitary confinement. Jack paused, considering the impending punishment. I don't even know what solitary confinement is supposed to be. His hands moved deftly, sketching on the blank page. Haven't I already been exiled to this rose garden? What more solitary could it get? He was baffled by his dear father's actions. Or does he just want to lock me inside the house? John, unable to contain himself, spoke up from the side. You have less than a month left of your academy break, and now solitary confinement. Hearing John's words, Jack suddenly froze, his hands stilled on the paper. He turned, looking at John with surprise. The academy? I forgot. Only now did Jack remember what time of year it was, and more importantly, the fact that he was still a student. He was currently 14 years old, which meant he was attending the Royal Academy. His attendance was easily explained. All noble children in the Kingdom of Teslon were required to attend the academy. As long as they were healthy, no one could escape this compulsory education. The duration of study at the academy was also clearly defined, typically 4 years, with admission allowed from the age of 14. In other words, he was currently in his first year. The crucial point was that the new term was approaching. It was currently summer break, following the end of the first semester. Jack was elated that he was still a student, but another thought flickered through his mind. His master had close ties to the Royal Academy. Even if he neglected everything else, his master was the one person he couldn't afford to ignore. Jack frowned, mulling over recent events. He didn't have time to squabble with those dukes. He looked at his finished painting, breathing a sigh of relief. It seemed he should head to the academy after all. Recalling his esteemed father's plan, he couldn't help but chuckle. 27 days of vacation left, 20 days of solitary confinement, 6 days to reach the academy. Did the Marquis intend to ship him off directly after his confinement? Seriously. Even in his past life, he couldn't fathom it. Jack laughed, a helpless sound. How could I ever have put up with this? John, who had been waiting patiently beside him, finally spoke. Are you finished? Jack stepped away from the easel. So, where is this solitary confinement room? Hearing the question, John hesitated, looking at Jack. Jack grew impatient. Did you swallow your tongue? Tell me where it is. John hesitated for a moment longer before stammering, Young master, in this house, there's only one place called solitary confinement. John bowed, handing a letter to Jack. It's the holding place for criminals who have committed crimes within the territory. Jack's face paled. No way. He truly hadn't expected such a dreadful place. The prison. Jack wanted to confirm with John, but it seemed no matter how many times he asked, the answer would remain the same. John lowered his head, confirming with a firm yes. An invisible pressure descended, making it difficult for even John to breathe. A tempest raged within Jack, a torrent of curses flooding his mind. Damn it, this is awful. Just you wait. During the days since Jack's return, this summer break wasn't simply a time for rest. In reality, for children of noble families, the academy break wasn't for leisure, but a time to learn new things. This was evident when looking at Perron, who had suffered a head injury. During Perron's breaks, there were frequent dances and social gatherings. Before his injury, he'd attended social functions almost daily, meeting vassals and acquainting himself with other nobles. In a dank prison, only screams and the clang of chains could be heard. Bare, white feet stood in stark contrast to the heavy, blood-stained shackles. But Jack had no such opportunities. Not that he'd ever been particularly interested in the Marquisate. That was just what everyone in the territory kept telling him. Jack shed his elegant clothes, donning the prisoner's garb befitting his current predicament. They said he wasn't fit to live anywhere in the territory. The thought churned his stomach. Damn bastards. Jack marched towards the ancient, guard-lined gate. He would go to the prison willingly, before those knights could come for him. His pale, unblemished hands were shackled with cold iron cuffs. John wept as he bid farewell to his young master, his face a picture of such sorrow that it touched even Jack. Watching John's tearful goodbye, John's tears flowed freely, his face gaunt and drawn. His heart seemed to break with an unspoken grief. He resembled a small, lost dog, both pathetic and helpless. Please, take care, he choked out. Seeing John like this, Jack felt a blush creep up his neck, a flicker of embarrassment warming his cheeks. Let's go, Jack muttered. This is mortifying. Currently. Jack sat leaning against the wall, arms crossed, finding a surprising degree of comfort in the scene. The cell was surprisingly well equipped. He wondered if it was some twisted form of his father's concern. There was a bed, a wash basin, and 3 meals a day were delivered regularly. However, Jack found little to appreciate in these amenities. He eyed the food on the floor, his face paling at the sight of the flies buzzing around it. But the real issue was the damp, mildewed blanket on the bed, stained with what looked suspiciously like blood. It hadn't been washed in 500 years, he was sure of it. The food itself was a nauseating color, swarming with flies. Even a peasant wouldn't touch it. Jack sat on the bed, arms crossed, and sighed. Solitary confinement. He'd had all day to think about it, and it was all a bit much. He mentally catalogued what he knew about this kind of prison. Nobles who owned land had the right to punish those within their domain, according to the laws of their own fiefdoms, in addition to the laws of the kingdom. These prisons were similarly under their control. In other words, a vassal lord held the same power as a king within his own territory. Jack's situation was a little unique, but he could understand the principle. Although his father had imprisoned him in this dungeon, as if he were disowned, he was still his son. Jack shook his head in frustration. He hadn't exactly incited a riot. Why choose to lock up his own son? He began to search for a reason, the image of the incompetent Perron quickly coming to mind. He wondered how his father would cover up his precious son's mishap. Would he claim poison? Forbidden artifacts? No. Too lenient. He glanced out the cell window at the descending night. He would undoubtedly fabricate some dramatic tale. Jack's imagination began to work. Jack Valantier, the disgrace of the family, had delved into dark magic, driven by his own greed. Then, while Jack was studying, Perron, his elder brother, discovered his transgression and tried to reason with him. But Jack Valantier, ignoring his brother's pleas, attacked Perron with his dark magic. Don't you dare order me around. Despite the injury to his head, Perron, like a benevolent saint, reached out and stroked his weeping brother's hair. It's all right, he'd murmur, forgiving his brother despite everything. Jack let out a breath, feeling a pang of sympathy for himself. The story was truly tragic. Such a tragic scene must have played out in the minds of that Marquis and his deranged wife. Thinking of this tragic tale being spun from the lips of his esteemed father and that mad woman, Jack covered his mouth, unable to contain himself. Just the thought of them made him nauseous. Thinking any more would give him a headache, so Jack gave up, stretching out comfortably on the bed. Well then, he thought, I'll just wait a day or two and then get out of here. I can't waste my precious holiday in this disgusting dungeon. Jack shifted, his gaze drifting towards the cramped opposite wall. He held no love for this territory, and though he wanted to leave as soon as possible, three things kept him anchored. Jack's eyes slowly closed. His sister, John, and his master. Aside from all that, he was still incredibly weak. The thought jolted Jack back to alertness, and he began to take stock of himself. 168 centimeters tall, 55 kilograms. He possessed not a shred of muscle. For him, this world obeyed only one thing, his own rules. Jack understood clearly the law of the jungle. The strong survived, and the weak weren't even fit for fertilizer. He survived because he was strong, and he would attain everything he desired. Though he had no intention of indulging in the slaughter he had in his past life, Jack gritted his teeth. There were still things he had to do, scores to settle, more than he had initially imagined. His mood was as heavy as a waterlogged sponge. Right now, he needed two things, time and power. Sunset was beginning to paint the academy, the place where he could achieve his goals. The academy would provide both. His ambition now soared far beyond those of his peers. He could use the time to uncover his talents and increase his strength, and naturally, he would once again wield the power he possessed in his previous life. Jack raised a hand, staring at it, as if gazing down the path of his future. Enough power to protect his master, his sister, and John. Jack clenched his fist. His resolve would not be easily broken. In this life, he had people to protect. He sat down, leaning against the shackle-ridden wall behind him. Then, he lightly snapped his fingers, and a potent surge of magic began to flow through his body. Though he didn't relish it, he would take what he needed. The pale blue light of his magic gently radiated outwards, a sensation of immense power, yet strangely comforting. A magic user was divided into 10 ranks, the regulations of which were clearly defined. Ranks 1 through 3 were novices, 4 through 6 were veterans, and 7 through 9 were called high-ranking magic users. Finally, the strongest and rarest rank was 10. The 10th rank magic users known as masters, also called the transcendent. Jack felt the potent magic within his chest. A place away from prying eyes was all he needed. It was perfect. He felt a pang of disappointment for his previous body, then a surge of something akin to wonder. Just 2 hours to form a magic circle. Youth truly is a blessing. Jack watched the magic flowing in his palm, lost in thought. I wonder if it's because I started training my magic at 17 in my past life. A small orb of magic materialized above his hand, and Jack tossed it playfully in the air. Suddenly, a thought struck him, and he abruptly stopped, swiftly dispersing the small, hovering orb with a flick of his wrist. He couldn't risk anyone discovering this yet. The sound of approaching footsteps, distinctly feminine, reached his cell. Jack's mind raced. Whose voice is that? Could it be the Marchioness coming to berate me? Not wanting to invite further trouble, he burrowed under the covers, feigning sleep. But the footsteps were too light. In the dimly lit corridor, illuminated only by flickering torches mounted on the walls, the soft tread of shoes stopped outside his cell door. A gentle voice, as if designed to melt his frozen heart, reached his ears, making him startle. Jack bolted upright, a jolt of recognition shooting through him. It was a voice he knew. Long, golden hair cascaded beyond the bars. Jack felt as if he were dreaming. The person he only saw in his dreams. The person he only met in distant memories. The tear-stained face of the sister he yearned to protect appeared on the other side of the bars. Elizabeth Valentier. Elizabeth Valentier. Jack scrambled to his feet and knelt before his sister, gazing up at her. Tears streamed down her face as she gently caressed his cheek. Jack, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, are you hurt anywhere? Such a simple, Tender question, yet it stripped him of the hardened resolve he had carefully constructed. Tears welled in his own eyes, a mixture of grief for his current predicament and regret for failing his sister in his past life. His beautiful, kind sister. Outside the cell window, the bright moonlight began